Hi everyone, welcome to the Whiteleyverse with me, Connor Whiteley, for another daily short story. Now, before I start today's story, please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithm. Also, if you want to buy this short story and any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers and at your local bookstore and local library if you requested, and you can order paperback copies from Amazon. Now, here's today's short story. I hope you enjoyed just as much as I did writing it.
Bodies in the Boot. The 5th of October 2023. Medway, Kent, England. How many bodies could you fit in there, Auntie? Private Eye Bettie English just laughed and grinned as she leant against the icy cold metal pillar at the car dealership she was visiting with her nephew Sean. She had to admit that the car dealership was rather nice considering this was Medway of all places, with its wide forecourt that wrapped around the main metal building perfectly. There was a great range of cars on display, and Betty couldn't have cared less about their names and models because she was useless at cars. But there were plenty of red, black and blue cars in all different shapes and sizes, in neat little rows on the forecourt. Betty sort of recognized some of the brands like Fiat, Citroën and Ford, but she had to smile to herself because she was useless at their models. They all just looked the same to her, a metal box on top of four wheels. Betty waved at a young man in the dealership's tight black uniform, as he led a young couple followed by a first-time buyer round the forecourt. She had no idea why a first-time buyer was looking at cars at this end of the court. They were stupidly overpriced, and Betty was only up here because she had wanted to play a game with Sean. The game was simple, and Betty couldn't deny it was great fun. Whenever her and Sean opened a car boot, they had to guess how many bodies they could fit inside. Betty had no idea how she was going to tell her detective boyfriend, Graham Adams, later on, but she knew she would and they would laugh about it. Betty went over to Sean, and he definitely had great taste. He was looking at a small black car that would be hard to notice. It would fit in small gaps easily enough, and it was probably quicker than it looked. Betty wasn't sure if the price tag of £6,000 was right, and she could afford that from a single hour of work, but she wasn't buying it for Sean. The entire point why Betty had come with Sean to the dealership was to help him find a good car, not that she knew what she was looking for, and she wanted to teach him that, even though she was a millionaire and him and his boyfriend lived with them. It never hurt to learn money lessons, which was why Sean had to buy this car with his own money. I'm thinking 2 bodies, Sean said, grinning and running a hand through his longish blonde hair with tastefully done pink highlights. Betty smiled and shook her head. He wasn't wrong. The black car did have a big boot, but it wasn't big enough for 2 adult bodies inside. Maybe an adult and a dwarf, but not 2 adults. Miss English? Betty turned around and forced herself to smile as the head of the dealership came over with a massive frown on her face. The woman looked rather good in a dirty white blouse with tons of creases in it. Her black trousers had holes in, and her high heels looked like they were about to break at any moment. Are you the president of the British Private Eye Federation? The woman asked. Betty nodded. She loved being the president of the federation, who oversaw all private investigators in the UK that allowed her to help innocent people, improve lives, and she had the power equal to some small countries thanks to the federation's blackmail files. Something she intended never ever to use. Yes, I am, Betty said. Can I help you at all? The head of the dealership came closer, and Betty looked at her name tag, Cindy. Betty wanted to cough as the sheer awful hints of fish, chips and fried food filled her senses. It was awful. I found a body of sorts in the boot of my car, attached to a note that says I'm going to die in 10 minutes. Betty looked at Sean. As much as she wanted to keep looking for a new car, this was definitely going to have to wait. Cindy was in danger, and Betty couldn't let anything bad happen. And it would be good for business too. Cindy might even give them a free car out of it. I need to see your car, Betty said. Of course, Cindy said. Oh, thank you, Miss English. Betty just grinned at Sean because she had a feeling that this case was going to be wonderfully weird, chaotic, and very odd indeed. A few moments later, Betty frowned as Cindy opened the booth of her large silver Fiat in the back car park of the dealership. There was a high, thick green fence that ran along the sides of the car park, and you could only come through it by the forecourt, and a small blue door that led into the main building. Both required a passcode. Betty liked how Sean looked like he was playing on his phone, but he was probably already hacking into the dealership's security cameras. She loved having a postgraduate with her specializing in advanced technological engineering, or a drone and computing degree as she liked to describe it. "Here you go," Cindy said. "I hate this, I just hate this." Betty gently rubbed Cindy's shoulder as she went closer to the boot. There was a large mannequin inside without a face, features or any clothes on. But there was a handwritten note that had been taped to the face of the mannequin. Betty wanted to focus on the note, but she leant into the booth of the car for a moment. She carefully looked around the rusty trim of the boot, and checked for any fabric, fibers or anything else that might tell her who did this. There was nothing. The sound of customers laughing, making offers and bargaining made Betty smile. She really hoped everyone here was getting a good deal for their cars and everything was working. She had heard way too many horror stories of dealerships selling bad cars to too many innocent people. She really wanted everyone to get good cars here. It was the least the people of Medway deserved. Most people in this district could barely afford heating and food, let alone a new car. Betty put on her gloves that she always carried with her, and she read the note out to Sean. "In 10 minutes, I'm going to kill you, bury you and make you pay for what you're doing here," Betty said. Sean smiled. "Well, that would explain what I've found in your security logs and your computer systems." Betty folded her arms and just looked at Cindy. She knew something wasn't right here. "You," Sean said, "have been coming to the forecourt at 2 a.m. at night every Monday for the past 4 months. You log in and you've been changed financial records to increase the interest people are paying, after they've already signed the contracts." Cindy leant against her car. "You have no right to hack into my systems. That's a crime." "I could call my detective boyfriend and see what he has to say about this," Betty said. Sean took a step closer to Cindy. "Even worse, you keep digital records of all the faults in your cars, but the paperwork you give to buyers say they are perfectly in order." Betty really hated Cindy. How the hell could she betray, hurt and con so many innocent people that only wanted a cheaper car instead of going to a franchise of a major brand? It was disgusting. "My death threat though," Cindy said. Betty nodded. "We'll investigate that, but I promise you there will be a price to pay for your criminal activities." Cindy shook her head. "Just find out who wants to kill me." Betty was about to say something but Cindy just walked off, so Betty focused on the note, and noticed it had been written on the dealership's own branded paper. "You know someone here wants revenge," Betty said. "Cross-reference all the employees and their families with any purchases in the last 2 years. "Okay," Sean said. Betty went over to the thick green security fence that separated the forecourt from the secured parking area. The small silver pad was perfectly clean with no marks, fingerprints or signs it had been interfered with. Betty was sure it was an employee of the dealership, and that only confirmed her theory even more. If an outsider had done this, then there would be signs of someone trying to break in. No signs of anyone coming or going on the security footage, but I think it was looped round so it wasn't really recording. "It isn't even picking us up now," Sean said. Betty really liked having Sean with her. He was always a brilliant crime-solving partner. She felt lucky to have him in her life, unlike his mother. "Anything on the purchases?" "Still cross-referencing." Betty nodded, and she headed over to the blue door on the other side of the secure parking area, and went inside the main building. She needed to talk to someone, and she needed to get to the bottom of this threat before a woman died. Cindy might not have been innocent, but she never ever deserved to die. "You could fit tons of bodies in that car," Sean said, grinning. Betty laughed as she stood in the middle of the beautiful showroom in the main building, and she was shocked at how great it looked. The grey tile flooring was shiny, sterile, and Betty was slightly pleased to see she had lost most of her baby weight, at last, in her reflection. There were 8 posh, expensive BMWs, Land Rovers and a lot more expensive cars she didn't recognize, lined up against the floor-to-ceiling windows facing the forecourt, and the small offices looked impressive behind the glass wall behind her. Betty had no idea how the hell people were meant to afford the BMWs, Land Rovers and other cars, but this dealership clearly had ambition. And Betty couldn't deny Sean wasn't wrong about the boot of the Land Rover. A killer could probably fit tons of bodies inside, something she hoped would never ever be tested. "Can I help you?" a middle-aged man asked. Betty was glad her plan had finally worked. Being president of the Federation had always meant she had needed to look imposing, scary and powerful time to time, and apparently, she had the look down perfectly these days. So she could activate it whenever she wanted. And con artists like this dealership always liked money and power. "We're looking for a car for my nephew, and I'm wondering what would you recommend," Betty said. "Can we talk in your office?" Betty noticed the middle-aged man's name tag said Carl, and he was a step down from Cindy. Maybe he wanted to kill her to take over. "No, I'm afraid some trainees are in my office at the moment," Carl said, gesturing behind him where there were 5 trainees watching someone on a computer. Betty hadn't realized there might be trainees here, and there was a chance that someone might have gotten a job as a trainee to target the dealership. They wouldn't pop up on the main employees list because they were only a trainee. Sean said, clearly making the same connection. "How many trainees do you have at the moment?" "I have a friend that might want a job." Carl's face lit up. "Oh, that is wonderful. We always need more trainees and we have a lot of great benefits, but I'm afraid we're fully booked at the moment with trainees. We only have 8 spaces, you see." Betty cocked her head. That didn't make any sense, because there were only 5 trainees behind the computer, and she couldn't see any more in the showroom. Betty went over to the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, and noticed only 1 trainee outside showing people round the cars. "Where are the other 2 trainees?" Betty asked. Carl shrugged. "I don't know. They are all meant to be here." Betty checked her watch and bit her lower lip. It was probably already past the 10-minute mark, so they might already be too late. "I need you to find them now," Betty said. "Who the hell do you think you are bossing me about?" Carl asked. "I am Private Eye Bettie English, president of the British Private Eye Federation, and unless you want your boss to die, you will help me." Carl stumbled back a little, like Betty had actually hit him or something. Betty just glared at him and Carl hurried off. "Should we look ourselves?" Sean asked. Betty shook her head. Something wasn't right here. Clearly the dealership was ripping people off, changing interest payments after contracts were signed, and selling bad cars as good ones. That made sense, and as much as Betty didn't want to admit it, that was normal in the dealership game. But why the mannequin? Betty couldn't understand why use the mannequin in the car boot to scare Cindy or warn her. It made no sense, because if the trainee or whoever really was going to kill Cindy, then why not just kill her? Unless Cindy was never meant to die, and she had set up this plan in the first place. "Where's Cindy's office?" "Did you see it on the security footage?" Sean led Betty across the showroom, and into a large corner with more desks, chairs and cabinets than Betty had ever seen before. The entire office smelt of coffee, chips and fried fish, which made Betty really want to vomit. It was so overwhelming. Betty went over to the perfectly arranged desk, and found a notepad that Cindy had been writing on. Then she compared the writing on the notepad to the note on the mannequin. It was a match. "Why do this?" Betty asked. "Why would Cindy want us to investigate, and why would she threaten herself?" Carl came into the office. "I found the 2 trainees, they were making out in the toilets. Typical young men and women." Betty was glad that loose thread was dealt with, so Cindy was clearly up to something, but she had no idea what.
Carl, Betty said, why would Cindy threaten herself?
Bloody bastard, Carl said.
She's going to abandon ship and leave me for the cops.
I knew it was wrong, it was bloody stupid, but I needed the money. Betty leant across the desk. If you want any chance of not going to prison, then you need to tell me everything. Auntie, Sean said, taking out his phone. Cross-referencing came back and every single current and former employee was forced to buy a car and they are still paying it off. Betty couldn't believe that. That was outrageous and extremely illegal, and that was just messed up.
Talk, Betty said.
Fine. Me and Cindy started this dealership after university because we wanted some fun, we wanted a business, and we used to steal cars for a living. It wasn't hard to fake reports and mots. Betty rolled her eyes. She really didn't like these people. Then we realized running a business is a little hard, so we got more and more employees.
But when we had to cut their wages, they threatened to leave, so Cindy offered them a discount on a car.
And, Betty said, that's when you nailed them because they brought the car on finance and then you changed the interest rate so much you trapped them. What was the deal, Carl? If they keep working and shut their mouths, you do it interest-free? Carl nodded and looked to the ground.
What changed?
Sean asked.
One of the trainees who brought a car off us was outraged. She spoke up and went to the cops.
We increased her interest rates to crippling amounts, so she didn't retract her statement from the cops. Betty clicked her fingers. There was something on the local news, the only thing that seemed to make her baby boy sleep at the moment, about this. A 19-year-old woman had died in a drunk car crash last week. She had been drinking and upset over crippling interest repayments. You killed that woman, Betty said. You might not have crashed the car, but she wouldn't have been drinking if you hadn't done that. Carl shrugged. Business is business. Betty just looked at Sean. She hated these people, and she was going to make them pay, and Betty was going to do everything in her power to give the victims of this con their money back. Betty went round the desk and got very close to Carl's ear. So the cops are coming here, and Cindy has probably run. I have the power and influence to get you a reduced prison sentence, but you have to come clean about your operation. I can't, Carl said. Cindy will ruin me. Betty laughed. Then you have clearly never met the Federation. You are conning tons of innocent people, and you caused a young woman to die. If you don't do the right thing, then I will use the Federation's resources to bury you alive. Betty forced herself not to frown as she stood up. She hated being like this, but she hated people like Carl and Cindy even more. It was just unforgivable to take advantage of so many innocent, good people that only wanted a damn car to get to work. She does have the power to do it, Sean said. Especially with the evidence I've found. Carl stood up and paced round the office for a few moments. Betty really hoped he was going to make the right choice. Fine, Carl said. I'll testify to everything that happened here, and I'll even tell you where Cindy probably is. Just don't send me to jail. Betty laughed because Cindy was finally going to get justice, and she actually had an idea about what to do with dear old Carl. A few hours later, Betty leant against an awfully cold metal pillar in the forecourt of the dealership, and she just smiled at all the flashing red and blue lights of the 4 police cars that blocked the road entrance inside. There weren't any cars left on the forecourt, and Betty was surprised to see so many weeds had cracked the concrete under the cars. Apparently all of them had been stolen from one place or another, and her sexy, wonderful boyfriend Graham had confirmed the dealership had been running this scam for about 2 decades. Cindy wasn't even as young as she looked. Betty watched as one of the police cars drove away with Carl and some of the other employees in the back. She didn't feel sorry for Graham or the other detectives that were going to have to sort this mess out. Thankfully, she would send off all the evidence they had collected in a moment, so hopefully that would allow the detectives to get home to their families sooner. A small group of young men and women in hoodies and black jogging bottoms were gathered just at the road entrance. Betty didn't like how sad, hopeless, and disappointed they looked because they had all probably brought cars here at one point or another. And they had probably figured it out that they were conned. So a ton of their money was wasted, at a time when no one could really afford it. Betty waved as Graham, in his sexy white shirt and trousers, and Sean came over after opening the main building's door for a bunch of uniform officers to carry out boxes of paperwork. The cold night air smelt of strong bitter coffee, fried fish and chips, and Betty was so looking forward to going home to her two sweet twins. Then she was going to go for a shower. She really didn't want to smell of fish and chips anymore. The damn smell had probably soaked into her clothes. My officers picked up Cindy a few minutes ago trying to flee to Dover, Graham said. She's silent, but there are records and laptops in her boot. We'll nail her for this fraud. Thank you, Betty said, blowing the man she loved a kiss.
What's going to happen to Carl and the others?
Graham shrugged.
That's up for the Crown Prosecution Service to decide.
Carl was a big player, but testifying will help him, and the others were only victims in truth, so we only need a statement. Good, Sean said, playing with some brand new car keys in his hands. You didn't, Graham said playfully, hitting Betty's arm.
Well, it isn't my fault they left the car keys unattended and their computers open, Betty said.
As a private eye, I only care about solving crimes, helping people and benefiting my business. I so did not hear that, Graham said before giving Betty a kiss on the cheek and going over to some uniformed officers. Sean folded his arms and grinned.
What are you going to do about the victims?
Betty smiled. Oh, you know, what's the point of being a millionaire if you can't help people? All the victims will suddenly and mysteriously be sent £10,000 tomorrow afternoon, with a small note. Mysteriously, sure, Sean said, hugging Betty.
I love you, Auntie. I love you too, Sean.
Betty followed Sean over to the other side of the secure parking area, and there was only one car left, a massive black Land Rover, and Betty was seriously impressed. That would be a great car for a high-speed chase. Open the boot, Sean said, climbing into the front seat. Betty popped up the boot and gasped as 10 mannequins popped out from under a big blue blanket. Betty just laughed, and she really did love her nephew, and at least the age-old question was answered. How many bodies could you fit in there? And Betty had to admit she loved being a private eye, an auntie and a girlfriend to a detective, a lot more than she ever wanted to admit.
Welcome back everyone, it's me again, Connor Whiteley. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's story, because I flat out love writing, creating stories and sharing them with you. If you really enjoyed today's story, then please remember to like, comment and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new content, and the engagement really helps the Whiteleyverse with the YouTube algorithms. And if you want to buy this short story or any of my other fiction, then they're available from all major ebook retailers, and you can get them from your local library if you requested, and you can order the paperback copies from Amazon, your local bookstore or local library if you request it. Lastly, if you want to support the channel on a one-off basis, then you can now buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Connor Whiteley. Also, if you know anyone who would enjoy today's story, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the channel. So, thanks for watching the Whiteleyverse, and I'll see you again soon. Have a great day, everyone.